How's it going, guys? Kris here with another Battlefield Top 10 for you today, and this time around I'm going to be going back and taking a look at a few of my favourite shotguns to appear in the different Battlefield games over the years, picking out the ones that I consider to be some of the best. Gonna have to admit, this has probably been one of my trickiest top 10 categories that I've actually covered so far, because the shotguns in general all do a very similar sort of thing and work in the same kind of way. Being close quarter cannons that fire off loads of pellets per shot, inflicting heavy damage up close, but far less over distance. And so for consistency, I'm just going to be covering the gun's standard buckshot ammo. Throwing slugs and other ammo types into the mix is just going to make the list a bit too messy and complicated to compare. Apart from a few minor stat alterations here and there, you pretty much know what to expect when picking any of the shotguns in the series. But I've still gone and chosen a few of the ones that have stood out the most to me over the years nevertheless. Just don't be too surprised if your favourite gun doesn't make the list, or if the order might seem a little bit strange this time around. Ranking a bunch of guns that do a very similar kind of thing wasn't exactly the easiest thing in the world. With that said, feel free to share all of your opinions and let me know down below which shotguns you like to use the most in the Battlefield games, and which ones you reckon are some of the best in the series. Let's go! So first weapon of the list is the slowest firing shotgun in Battlefield 4, the Hawk 12G, which has got quite a few big weaknesses that are nicely complemented by having big strengths. It's a pump action shotgun that only fires at 83 RPM, making it one of the laziest in the series, and it only holds a grand total of 6 cartridges, which is also one of the lowest amounts in Battlefield 4. Not exactly the kind of thing that's going to help the gun out in close quarters when you're surrounded by enemy players. But on the flip side, the Hawk 12G's sluggish fire rate is countered by the gun dishing out the most damage per shot, by firing the most pellets, with the weapon potentially dealing up to a total of 235 damage, which is over double what's needed to take someone down. Talk about overkill. Of course, unless you're at point blank range, a lot of that damage is going to get nullified by those pellets spreading out and missing, with less connecting with your target the further away they are, and with the damage per pellet getting weaker over distance too. But having more pellets per shell than all the other shotguns in BF4 at least gives it a very strong advantage, granting it the most power, helping to ensure that more targets are going to go down in just one pull of the trigger. And to counter the weapon's lack of ammo is the fact that it's a magazine-fed gun with some of the quickest reload speeds, helping you to get right back into the action fast, still making it a somewhat reliable and very dangerous weapon in close quarters. Next up in 9th place is the 37 STAKEOUT from Battlefield Hardline, another really brutal choice for players who like to rush through tight areas. The STAKEOUT was a cop weapon that featured on the Enforcer class, and it was a pretty popular choice back in the Hardline days, performing really well on some of the game's close quarter maps with lots of buildings and interiors. Infantry play was the main focus in that game, and this allowed the gun to excel on those maps that had a lot of short sight lines and indoor spaces, being a weapon with a strong balance of close range power and speed. It didn't deal the most damage per shot, firing less pellets than other options like the 870p Magnum, but the gun's faster pump action fire rate meant that if your first shot didn't put the other guy down, or strayed off target completely, at least you could get another shot out reasonably quickly to finish the job, before that player has a chance to return the favour. Pellet spread was generally a little bit wider with the STAKEOUT, but it was still fully capable of killing someone up close in just one blast, which in most cases still makes it an effective choice here. It also meant that if you didn't aim directly at your target, you were still likely to deal considerable amounts of damage anyway, sometimes making it feel a bit more forgiving, especially when taking on enemies with less health that just simply needed finishing off. It was a pretty fun weapon to use in Hardline with a nice level of balance, having decent kill times and a very manageable recoil pattern. Always handy when an extra follow-up shot was needed. At number 8 is the M1897, aka the M97 trench gun. Fairly average option to pick in Battlefield 5, but arguably a much more effective choice when we saw it the first time around in Battlefield 1. Sometimes the M97 tends to fly under the radar a bit. It's not got any kind of outstanding qualities to set it apart from other guns, with a lot of its stats lying somewhere in the middle. Yet it's probably got one of the best balances of attributes in that game as a whole, making it more versatile. The M97 isn't the quickest firing shotgun, nor is it the slowest, and the same thing can be said about its power per shot. But this still gives the gun the ability to take players out in a single blast up close, just not always as reliably or consistently. Though having that slightly faster fire rate will still give the gun fairly competitive 2-shot kill times in CQC nevertheless, made even easier by the fact that the M97 is slam fire, meaning you can fire at its maximum rate by holding down the trigger, firing consecutive blasts one after the other. Recoil is still a bit jumpy, jolting from side to side a fair bit, but once again it was set somewhere down the middle between the other choices on offer, reflecting most of the gun's other stats. And overall, it might not seem like a god gun with tons of power or potential, but it's still one of the best good all-rounder shotguns for close quarter combat in Battlefield 1, giving the user a really nice balance of stats across the board. As for number 7, we're heading back into Battlefield 4, where we'll be able to find the UTS-15. A fairly unique shotgun in the list with quite a lot of useful factors that might often go unnoticed. The UTS-15 fires slightly faster than the Hawk 12G, yet fires 3 less pellets per shot as a trade-off, giving the UTS slightly quicker 2-shot kills, but making its 1-shot slightly less consistent. With that said, in the grand scheme of things, the gun is still capable of outputting about 200 damage per shot up close, so you only really need half of its pellets to land on target here anyway to get the job done. So in a way, it's still more than capable of knocking its targets down easily in short-range gunfights in single shots anyway. But what the UTS-15 has, that most of the other shotties don't, is a 15 shell capacity, letting you keep on going on and on in the middle of a fight, without being hindered by the sudden need to reload. I mean, those reloads do take a fair bit of time to perform, loading in 1 shell at a time, but providing you do so in a safe area, behind cover, and get to grips with the reload cancel technique, this shouldn't really give you too many problems as you play. Though just to give the UTS a bit more usefulness in close quarters, it's also got the lowest amount of spread of all the shotguns whilst you're on the move. And because you're often going to be strafing around a lot to line up your shots on target, this will give the gun an even tighter spread while you do so, making it more accurate, helping to extend the weapon's range. The next weapon in the list is yet another pump-action shotgun, and this one happens to be one of Battlefield 1's biggest villains, the Model 10A. A pretty notorious weapon in that game that was super deadly and super popular, especially the Hunter variant that was blessed with a tighter spread pattern, helping to extend the gun's potential over range. I guess the biggest reason a lot of people loved using this gun was down to its sheer power output. It was one of the slowest shooting boomsticks in the entire franchise, with its fire rate only clocking in at about 78 RPM. But it more than compensated for this by having one of the strongest damage models in the game, with each pellet packing a bit more punch than normal, often equating to more reliable one-shot kills out to a fairly respectable distance. Its fire rate was easily one of the biggest negatives, so if you missed a shot, it could often be lights out for you in a 1v1 battle up close. I guess this didn't really make a huge deal to a lot of players who simply camped in corners and gunned people down unexpectedly as they wandered through doorways, but in a competitive sense, there was often a fairly high level of risk when using the Model 10A, complemented by the reward of dealing more damage and having a tad more range than average, making each shot all the more punishing. A very deadly option in Battlefield 1 that remained a popular choice right the way to the end, despite being nerfed a bunch of times over the game's life. Slap bang in the middle of the list at number 5 is one of the most unique entries to the list, because it not only fires 2 barrels of buckshot, but it also has a third one that can shoot off a rifle round as well, basically making it a triple barrel weapon. The gun I'm talking about is of course the M30 Drilling from Battlefield 5, and statistically speaking, it's one of the deadliest close range weapons in the whole series, not only being the quickest shooting shotgun in Battlefield 5, firing up to 225 RPM, but also the most powerful shotgun as well, dishing out up to a grand total of 302 damage per shot, spread out over 48 pellets. Having 2 barrels primed to go, delivering so much damage from each can make it a brutal weapon in close quarters, and a nasty one to be on the receiving end of. And although its damage per pellet might be a tad weaker than average, the sheer amount of them that you'll be blasting out per shot more than makes up for it in a lot of situations. Combine this with the fact that you can switch over to firing rifle rounds if you need to take on someone further away outside of the gun's comfort zone, and you've got a really deadly weapon that's both practical and versatile. The M30 Drilling isn't perfect by any means, having a much wider cone of spread than the other shotguns, along with more recoil and very limited ammo per reload, restricted to just a couple of shots. But providing you're careful, the M30 can be a relentless thing to use within short to mid distances, whilst having that rifle bullet too as a bit of extra backup. In 4th place is one of the Battlefield franchise's more frequent weapons that's popped up in quite a lot of different titles over the years, the SAIGA 12K. Semi-automatic shotgun with a lot of speed on its side. Functioning a lot differently to the pump actions, the SAIGA 12 is known for unloading lots of damage in a very short period of time. Although it's not quite as consistent at putting people down in one shot, although it's still fully capable of doing so, is generally more of a spam fire weapon that'll often need a few follow-up shots to get the job done in a lot of cases. It sort of functions in a fairly similar way over the different games it's featured in, and the fact that it uses box magazines, typically holding a decent amount of ammo, this lets the gun carry on doing what it does best while keeping you engaged in the action. You've usually got enough ammo to get through a fight, and you'll be able to get it topped up again quite quickly with those swift mag swaps in between, which is always a useful trait for a close quarter weapon to have. In a way, in Battlefield 4, it's kinda similar to the DBV-12, only having more accuracy, due to it having a much lower first shot recoil multiplier. In fact, the SAIGA 12K's recoil is one of the things that makes the gun so effective, generally being quite easy to manage when firing several shots out one after the other. Overall, a really tidy little package with a good balance of power, speed and flexibility. Next up in third place is another old gun from the First World War, the SJOGREN INERTIAL, probably one of the weirdest looking of the bunch. Don't let looks fool you though, because the SJOGREN definitely isn't a slouch, actually having one of the best balances of stats across the board. Probably the most notable version of the weapon can be seen in Battlefield 1, where it basically bridged the gap between the slower and faster firing options, having just enough power per blast to deliver knockout blows up close, whilst also firing quicker than your average pump action shotgun too. Meaning if the first shot didn't quite do enough to kill, or completely missed outright, then the next shot wasn't too far behind, giving it some really impressive kill times, basically being a very powerful semi-automatic. This essentially gave it the best of both worlds, sacrificing a little bit of damage per blast, perhaps forcing you to be more precise, but in favour of having shorter 2-hit kill times. You could still take people down in just one shot, but you'd have to be bang on target in order to do so. So in a way, it was a bit of a skill cannon that rewarded accuracy, making it a somewhat tricky but gratifying weapon to play with. But because the SJOGREN INERTIAL had a tighter pellet spread than the other pump actions, this also helped with that precision, whilst extending its range a bit too. And the fact that the recoil was also on the lower side as well was yet another thing to go into the gun's favour, making it really easy to control, complementing its general accuracy. Next up in second place is the Model 870 MCS, or Modular Combat Shotgun, a weapon that's appeared in quite a number of different Battlefield games over the years. The Model 870 is generally one of the deadliest shotguns in the series. In Battlefield 3 it fired the most pellets and dealt the most damage per shot, whilst firing at a slightly slower rate than average. Whereas in Battlefield 4, it still retained a lot of that power from the last game, being the second highest damage dealer, just behind the Hawk 12G, but it now had a little bit of extra speed compared to some of its competitors, now being the fastest firing pump action shotgun in the game, despite also having that really strong damage output as well. This made it one of the most effective and popular choices out of the shotgun category, killing in single shots up close up to a fairly decent distance, while still having a quick enough fire rate to take care of players relatively easy enough in a couple of shots if they're straying just outside of the gun's one-hit kill zone. The gun might be hampered a bit by its reloads, having to exchange shells one by one, not exactly having the nippiest reload speeds in the world, but it still gave you enough ammo to see you through a short range fight fine enough. And out of all the pump actions, the Model 870 was a pretty consistent choice to pick, having that nice balance of stats to make it an all-around great close quarter weapon. So in my number one spot of best shotguns, probably my favourite one of the lot to use, is Battlefield 1's Model 1900. Bloody brutal thing to be holding in a close quarter gunfight that's not only really effective, but also really fun to just run around and wreak havoc with as well. Now this is a gun that cranks things up to 11 when we're talking about power, basically being the Model 10A on steroids. The Model 1900 is a double-barreled shotgun, with the same damage stats as the Model 10A per blast, already making it a pretty dangerous weapon in CQC. But the fact that you can shoot the gun off at a far quicker rate of 300 RPM, making it the fastest firing shotgun in the game, means that you can wipe out anyone up close ridiculously quickly, whilst also having considerable range, down to the gun dealing just so much damage per shot. The Model 1900 can do things that other shotguns simply can't. For instance, if two enemies rush into a room that you happen to be in, you can swiftly dispatch of them both and survive that encounter, providing you're quick enough to the trigger and accurate. Other shotguns would probably let you deal with one of those guys, but the second would most likely get the better of you. Of course, the Model 1900 isn't without its flaws, and let's just address the elephant in the room by saying that it only holds 2 shells at a time, which typically take a fair bit of time to swap over, especially if you're only reloading a single shell, which takes a little bit longer to do. But this generally keeps you on your toes, forces you to seek out cover, and basically consider your escape routes while you play. A high risk, high reward weapon, and probably one of the most satisfying guns to use in the entire series. So that's my list of best shotguns in the Battlefield games, but like always, do let me know which ones are your favourites and why you like to use them down below in the comments. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's a pretty good time to do so with Battlefield 2042 just around the corner, and if you enjoyed the video, make sure you help the channel out by giving us a thumbs up. Thanks for watching folks, and I'll be seeing you in the next episode.